Hey everyone, I'm here today to take a look at the new Masterverse, Master of the Universe Revelations He-Man action figure from Mattel. Here's the packaging, and it's quite plain from the front, but there is this kind of blue pattern with all different symbols from the history of Master of the Universe on the top there. But it is very collector friendly. You've got a big open window at the front to see the figure, but the way the packaging opens at the top here, there are no cable ties or anything like that. The figure just goes in this clamshell. He sits in the back there, and then you put the front bit on, that holds the figure in, and you can put it back in the packaging. So you can open the packaging, take the figure out, and you don't damage it at all, and you can put the figure back in if you want to. So very collector friendly. On one side it just says He-Man, on the other side you've got some really nice artwork. This painting of He-Man there. And on the back there's another picture of him. Once again, really nice bit of artwork with Castle Grayskull in the background, and then it shows some other figures in the wave at the bottom, Mossman, Skeletor and Evil Lyn. So if you've got them on display and you had them all just kind of slid together on the shelf, you can almost have the spines on display kind of like you would a book or a DVD. Now this is based on how He-Man looks in the new cartoon, though I will say the face on the action figure is actually more cartoony than he actually looks in the cartoon. I don't feel like the face sculpt is that accurate to the cartoon. It's not a bad face sculpt, but I think it actually looks better in the cartoon and less cartoony. But you see it's very much based on the kind of classic He-Man design. If I bring in the Master Universe Classics He-Man, which is based on the vintage toy, you can see it's got the shoulder straps with the red squares on, and the larger wrist guard on one hand than the other. It's even got an open hand that side, like the vintage toys always used to have, and the colour scheme is very similar to that kind of vintage style He-Man as well. The only difference is the new He-Man has a H design on his chest rather than the Iron Cross. So I think the Iron Cross is considered maybe a little bit problematic now because they're kind of connotations connecting it to the Germans during the Second World War and all that. But He-Man has been using that H logo since Battle Armor He-Man, which was back in, I don't know, 1984 or 85, like in the second or third year of the original toy line. So that's nothing new. I don't think it's particularly a problem. The one thing I don't like, though, is that the armour on this new He-Man is so tiny, and it doesn't look that small in the show. But for some reason on the toy, they've made it look a bit like a sports bra that's too small for him. For me, it throws the whole aesthetic of the figure off, because it makes him look a bit longer and lankier than he actually is. If that armour was bigger, like the Classics armour is, and sort of fit over his torso a bit better, I think it would look so much better. But you see the colours are slightly different with the belt. On the original it was all orange, whereas on the new one it's a kind of yellowy gold colour. But in general, it's very similar. I do miss the tan that the old He-Man had. The new He-Man's a bit paler. This has got a lot of articulation though. This is probably the most articulated Master Universe figure we've ever had. For people who are kind of 6-7 inch collectors, they're going to love this because it's at the same level as a Marvel Legends, Star Wars Black, DC Universe, Multiverse type figures, where the arms go out to the side as well as forward and backwards. There's double joints at the elbows, swivel at the bicep as well there. The wrists, as well as swivelling round, also pivot inwards and outwards. The legs go out to the side, they swivel at the top of the thigh, but the thigh cut is up high enough that it doesn't sort of disrupt the sculpt of the leg. Double knee joints, like we saw at the elbows as well, and there's a swivel at the top of the boot. The feet move forward and backwards as well as having an ankle pivot. There's articulation at the torso where it will swivel from side to side, as well as an ab crunch. And then the head rocks forward and backwards, goes around, you know, there's loads of articulation. Basically everything you'd see in a Marvel Legends figure. And here he is in a bit of a weird pose, but it's just to show all that articulation without my hand in the way, basically, and kind of different moves you can get out of all the articulation in his arms, legs and torso. I found he looks best when I try and slide the armour as far down his torso as possible, but when you're fiddling around with him it does have a tendency to ride up very easily. It's kind of sculpted in a way where the centre of the armour piece seems to want to be right under his neck, which makes it look even more strange than it already does, being as small as it is. His kind of furry pants look a bit too big as well, and I think that also throws off the aesthetic as well, as he's got the, you know, the tiny armour that looks like a sports bra, but then these huge great pants on. And I think if the armour was a bit bigger and the pants were just slightly smaller, it would just make it look all that better. Now for accessories, he has 4 hands. He's got a flat hand, which helps for him holding the shield, which I'll show you later, and a fist hand, which is nice that we can finally have He-Man throwing a punch properly. But if you remove those, you can put gripping hands on both sides. And also, when you take these hands off, the wrist guard there will slide off if you didn't want it on, which is something we've never had before. Those parts are normally sculpted on. The wrist bracer on this side, this kind of bracelet, isn't removable though. But we can then slide in his gripping hands on each side, and that is of course so you can then have him holding his power sword. And it's a shame he didn't come with another hand where the swivel went the opposite way, so he could hold his sword aloft as he does when he's transforming into He-Man, kind of like the New Adventures He-Man from Classics. You can see here the way he holds his sword like that. You can get it, you can get the figure holding it above his head, and that's something that most He-Man figures don't have, so it would have been cool if it'd come with another extra hand for that. But I do really like this power sword. One problem I've had with power swords in the past, especially that classic design power sword, is they're always a bit too small, whereas this power sword actually looks like a decent long-sized sword. I mean, look at it here compared to the Filmation sword that comes with the Filmation He-Man, and how pathetic that sword looks. I've always thought that Filmation sword from Classics looked far too short. That looks like a proper sword that could do some damage. That thing is just way too small. So one thing I really like about this figure that I think is better than Classics is the power sword. As well as the sword, he comes with a shield, which is very much based on the shield that comes with the original He-Man figure, which is quite a nice design. I think we all recognise that if we're familiar with He-Man. The way it's got that kind of silver on the outside and the orange segments inside. Quite a flat look to it, which is nice. Makes it look a bit more like a real shield. And you can see how that flat hand that He-Man comes with really fits in there perfectly for holding the shield. He doesn't have a proper sheath on his back for the sword, but it does slide between the strap in his armour like the original toy did, and this is how it looks in the cartoon as well. In the Revelations cartoon, he doesn't have a sheath, he just kind of slides it down there as the original toy did. So this is accurate to how it looks in Revelation, even though it doesn't seem very practical. Like, you usually cut your back doing that. And if you want to, you can kind of slide the shield over there as well, or you can put the shield down like that and then have the sword go through, and that kind of holds them both on his back, which I think looks quite nice. It's got this nice texturing on his torso that makes it look like real skin, but he doesn't have that on his legs or arms. But it's almost like you can see the pores of his skin on his torso. So he's got the furry boots. The straps aren't painted on these boots, which doesn't bother me too much. But there is a bit of shading on the boots. Now for some comparisons, here he is next to the Origins He-Man, which is almost identical to the vintage toy He-Man, just with articulation. So that gives you an idea of what he looks like scaled with them. And how crazy is it that we have 2 different He-Man toy lines at retail at the minute, soon to be 3 when the new toy line based on that CGI Kids show comes out in a few months. I don't know if Origins will continue at that point, but it seems crazy to me we're going to have 3 Master of the Universe toy lines at retail at the same time. Here he is next to the Revelation Skeletor, which has got a more kind of cartoony look to him as well with the face. I really like the Havoc staff with that Skeletor, and he's got a fabric cape, which a lot of people like, but he's ever so slightly shorter than He-Man, which actually doesn't bother me. I think that kind of makes sense for the character, that he would be slightly shorter, he's, you know, a bit more hunched over or whatever. But they're quite nice looking figures. It's nice that they, you know, look a bit different, something a bit new. Because there's no point just having exactly the same looking He-Man and Skeletor over and over again. They've got to do little tweaks here and there to kind of update the design and make it worth adding to our collections. And here he is with a He-Man from every era. We've got New Adventures He-Man, Filmation He-Man, Mike Young Productions He-Man, Movie He-Man, and then Revelations He-Man. So from every main media version of He-Man over the years, the 4 different cartoon series and the movie. And he's pretty much the same height as Dolph Lundgren He-Man. The ground here is a bit uneven, so it might not show up like that, but they are about the same height if you want to know exactly how he would scale up with your classic collection. I don't think he looks too bad. I think he blends in reasonably well with them. I do prefer the classics aesthetic though. Even though they don't have as good articulation, I completely understand why people would want that more modern articulation the new one has. And it is nice for posing. Maybe if they did that but with a Filmation He-Man design or something, I'd like it a bit more. Maybe it's more the design than anything, but I've always been a big fan of classics. And they're just to compare all the power swords from over the years. And that new power sword probably is my favourite because it's based on the vintage design, but it's longer and it doesn't look as short and stumpy as the classics vintage style sword did. It's pretty much the same size as Dolph Lundgren's sword, so once again give you an idea of the scale of these figures. I can't imagine we'll ever get a Masterverse Castle Grayskull, but he does fit in well with the classics one. You can see him there in front of the entrance to Castle Grayskull. You can see with the drawbridge down, the archway still goes way above his head there, so there's plenty of headroom for him in the entrance to Castle Grayskull. So thanks for joining me for this look at the Master Universe Revelations Masterverse He-Man from Mattel. I think it's worth adding to your collection if you're a big He-Man fan, or even if you're a new one looking for just one He-Man figure to own. This one's going to be easier and cheaper to get hold of than any of the classics ones, and it has got the better articulation and a nice sword, even if I don't like the design as much as, say, Filmation or the more vintage looking He-Man. But still a nice action figure, nice that it scales up with Marvel Legends and G.I. Joe Classified and those types of modern figures. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.